And welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. You can find us at ricochet.com, America's Voice News, and all of your favorite podcast applications. I'm delighted today to be joined with Eric Early. Eric Early is a former candidate for Attorney General in the state of California. From what I understand, you got 950,000 votes?
Yeah, that's what I got. It's pretty cool.
Well, welcome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Very commendable. In a state like California, let me just ask you right off the bat, how does somebody that is considered right of center, with your perspective, and I want to get into a lot of this right now, how does somebody get that level of votes in very, very deep blue California?
Well, I had never been a candidate for public office before. And so that was my first foray into politics. I have a regular life. Not a professional politician, but as part of the campaign, I campaigned up and down this great state. And what I learned was, notwithstanding what you read and hear in the mainstream media, there are millions of conservative people in this state who are just tired of the way this state has been going and where it's going, and it just keeps getting worse. So, it was a lot of votes I got, and I so appreciate every single person that voted for me. But this state is not as quote-unquote deep blue as you read about in the media. Yes, unfortunately, it's completely controlled by a Democratic regime, but that worm is going to turn. I firmly believe that worm's going to turn. And while we're at it, this notion that California can't stand Donald Trump, that's also complete BS. There are Trump supporters up and down this great state. I'm one of them, unabashedly so. And, you always hear, oh, he only got 30-something% of the vote in the presidential election. Let's not forget, Donald Trump did not need this state to win the presidency. He and his team knew that. They were smart. They didn't waste the resources and spend the resources that it would have taken to do a full-blown campaign here. They didn't campaign here. They didn't spend money for advertisements. They didn't campaign here. And notwithstanding all that, they did get 30-something% of the vote. If they had gone all in on California, it would have been much closer. I doubt he would have won California. It would have been much closer vote. So this goes to your question, how does a conservative person get almost 1 million votes, especially somebody who never run before, in California? It's because there's a lot of people in this state who are sick and tired of the way it's been going. The guy I was running against, Xavier Becerra, is a disaster as far as I'm concerned, and I can tell you why I think that. The last governor, Jerry Brown, went off the deep end, and this new guy, Newsom, makes Jerry Brown look conservative. So this state is ready for a change, and it's coming.
You just said that you think the worm is going to turn here.
Yeah.
So you got Silicon Valley, it's the power base, it's the money. You've got LA and Hollywood, and we're here in Beverly Hills. It's obviously where a lot of money is, and most of that money does go to the left of center candidate in any election here. How is it going to turn when the power and the money is so concentrated?
Well, let me give you some examples. What's happening in the state is so bad, and it's finally starting to seep out even through the mainstream media. For example, the homelessness in this state of California it's becoming almost a national disaster. We have right here in Los Angeles, which has been run by Democrats for time immemorial, we have typhus starting to spread and come out. We're going back to medieval diseases. We have rats all over downtown. We have homelessness that's growing on a daily basis. It's all over the place. It's the result of the policies and the lack of leadership of the Democrats that have been in power for years. It's only getting worse. This stuff is moving into people's neighborhoods. They're not doing anything about it except paying lip service to it. And even a mainstream left-leaning publication like the Los Angeles Times is now taking them to task for what's happening with this homelessness. We had the same problem in San Diego, where there were some medieval type diseases that were starting to spread. It's up and down the state. It's in communities all over the state. This state has been run by Democrats for years now. San Francisco, Los Angeles, the supermajorities in the legislature up there, the governor's office. It's time for a change. People are starting to even hear it through the mainstream media. And there's on and on. Crime is on the rise in this state. The reason crime is on the rise is because these outrageous propositions, statutes, and ballots that have been passed by this supermajority are sold to us fraudulently by the Democratic power structure. People are starting to see that. That is starting to now even start seep out through the mainstream media. They've been emptying the prisons of these felons long before their times. Child molesters get let out now long before their sentences expire. You have this Governor Newsom who, when he's running for office, said, I will follow the will of the people. The will of the people was on two different propositions. The people of the state of California voted to support the death penalty. This character becomes governor, and one of his first acts is he signs an executive order saying, I'm freezing the death penalty in this state. In other words, he ignored the will of the people. They're arrogant, they're smug, they think they can get away with anything. They have been getting away with anything for years. People are starting to see it. People are getting upset about it. The list of these things go on and on. This state, the worm will turn in this state. I do believe it.
In the last election, there was a proposition to repeal the gas tax.
Yeah.
And it failed.
Yeah.
People voted against lowering the price of their own gas. And most people in this state, based upon the population, are working people. How do you get the message out to those people?
Dave, well, let me tell you the story about the gas tax repeal. By the way, I supported that repeal big time. The person who spearheaded the repeal, Carl DeMeo, down in San Diego, is a good friend of mine. He was a big supporter of mine on my campaign. He endorsed me in my campaign. He's got a popular radio program in Southern California, conservative radio program. The gas tax repeal is a perfect example of this entrenched, disingenuous power structure that treats the people of California like we're a bunch of morons. And that's yet another reason why things are going to change, because people are figuring it out. Let me explain what I'm talking about. This gas tax repeal was going to repeal a tax that I've heard different numbers that could be from 12 cents to 60 cents or something per gallon of gas. It was going to repeal it. Carl DeMeo and the people working with him to get the proposition on the ballot, I believe they got more than 1 million signatures. They raised the funds to get this on the ballot. It's very hard to get a proposition on the ballot. They did all that. But this is where it went from there. The Attorney General of California, one of the Attorney General's responsibilities, and that was the position I was running for, Attorney General is this fellow Xavier Becerra. One thing they get to do is draft what's called the ballot and title summary. It's that little paragraph or so that all of us voters read when we get those booklets in the mail about the election, or when we, go to the polls and we read it for the first time. And that's really what most of us do when we're voting on these propositions. Most of us don't really know what these propositions are about. So we go to the polls, we see the book, we read the paragraph, and we decide. So how did Mr. Becerra and his office draft this paragraph? They didn't say, if you vote against this proposition, every one of your gallons of gas is going to be taxed anywhere from 12 to 50, 60 cents a gallon. They didn't say that. What did Mr. Becerra say in the ballot and title summary? If you vote for this proposition, your roads are going to be unsafe, because if you vote against this proposition, that'll allow us to have money to fix your roads. So he completely misrepresented, lied to the people about what they were voting for. And then you add to that the fact that Jerry Brown said, we got to get this proposition defeated. He and his office and the power structure up there in Sacramento, wall-to-wall Democrats, raised millions of dollars from unions and the industries who get paid to fix roads. The only media we saw, because Carl's group couldn't afford the huge numbers for the media that would be needed, only media we saw was, if you support this proposition, our roads are going to be unsafe. So I would venture say 95% of Californians went to the polls and voted against the proposition, not knowing that what they were really saying was, yes, please tax my gas, each gallon 12 to 60 cents a gallon. I'm happy to have you tax me more. Please do it. That's why we lost that proposition. Now, what's amazing is then you look at the situation in France, where the President Macron of France, a couple months ago, gets on. He says, "Listen, we the government, we're going to be increasing the taxes on your gasoline." And the people of France basically got together and burned down huge chunks of cities.
The yellow vests.
The yellow vests, and those demonstrations went on for months. Yeah. They might even still be going on, for all I know. So this is yet another perfect example of the arrogance and the smugness of these people running this state, and how they treat the people like we're a bunch of idiots. And when I say that the worm is going to turn, is because people are figuring it out slowly but surely. And the other reason that Carl's group and everybody who was supporting the gas tax repeal was supporting is not only because we didn't want the taxes, because we knew, because this is standard practice with that government up there, which is in massive, massive debt. This state is in huge debt, that the monies that were received from these taxes would not even go to fixing the streets anyhow and the roads. It would be used to fill holes and debts that have been piling up for years and years, and pensions and like. And this is what we see is actually happening with that money. I want to get that. I might have gone on a little bit too much, but this is what we're dealing with in this state, and this is how remarkably the other side could get that proposition.
I want to get into that, and also Xavier Becerra. I want to talk about that because you're involved in something on that side as well.
Yeah.
Right after the break, we're going to be right back. I'm with Eric Early and Dave Sussman here at Whiskey Politics. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dave Sussman here with Eric Early. Now, Eric, you are an attorney. We are in a beautiful law firm here in a skyscraper looking over Los Angeles. And we were actually introduced because one of the last interviews we just did was with Don Blankenship.
Yeah.
And we're still getting a lot of comments, a lot of feedback from that interview. Incredible story. And for folks that haven't checked out that interview, it is a long one. It actually goes on about 2.5 hours, worth every single minute, and we're getting some incredible comments on that as well. So check that out at our channel, Don Blankenship. Don Blankenship is your client. He is just filing, or you on behalf of Don have filed a lawsuit against quite a wide swath of mainstream media, Fox News, and you know, obviously a lot of the mainstream media themselves.
Well, but the entire left to right and everybody in between news.
Yes.
And includes MSNBC, who I'm not a fan of, CNN, again, I'm not a fan of, all the way on one end to Fox on the other end, and everybody in between.
And personalities as well.
Yeah.
Judge Napolitano and other folks as well. Talk to us a little bit about this, because this is a $2 billion with a B dollar lawsuit. And you have to say billion with a B every day now, plus 10 punitive, for a total of a $12 billion lawsuit. Talk a little bit about this and what it is that you're hoping to get out of this.
Well, Don Blankenship is quite an individual. He's led quite a fascinating life. He rose from really nothing in West Virginia. He was working in the coal mines in the summer times. He gets an education. He goes to college. He becomes an accountant. He starts working as an accountant for the Massey Coal Mining Company in West Virginia. He makes his way up from where he started to becoming CEO of a huge multi-billion-dollar coal mining company. Don is, as I understand, he's one of the most well-known people in West Virginia. Don decided to, in the last election cycle, that he was going to run for U.S. Senator on the Republican side from West Virginia. He was running against, mainly against two other guys. The senator there is a guy named Joe Manchin, who a lot of people have heard about. He's a Democrat. Don started, because of Don's because the people know who Don is, because of Don's background, because of Don's ability to finance a campaign, Don started getting up there in the polls. He started getting ahead of his Republican challengers and threatening them. And really the Republican power structure in D.C. started getting very concerned that Don Blankenship could not only win the primary, but could beat Joe Manchin in a general election. And forces were set in motion to make sure Don Blankenship did not succeed. And in the week or two before that election, suddenly the airwaves and the media and everybody we're suing is saying, calling Don convicted felon Don Blankenship. Convicted felon, convicted felon, convicted felon. There was a whole thing set in motion by people who knew what I'm about to tell you was not true, and yet they set out to destroy him. Don Blankenship was never convicted of a felony. And if you look at, as people will look at your interview, they'll see what actually happened. Don was never convicted of a felony. Don was convicted of a misdemeanor. Never convicted of a felony. He's not a convicted felon. And he did not end up winning that primary. And so we were retained by Don to sue various media outlets for defamation. And it's flat out, clear-cut defamation. And a lot of your viewers are probably thinking, well, you know, this is the rough and tumble of politics. You know, these folks lie all the time. They get away with it. They don't get sued. They can't get sued. Well, the thing is, yes, Don is a public figure in West Virginia, which makes the standard of suing a public figure for defamation higher and more difficult to prove. But there are facts here in this case that we're going to use to evidence that heightened standard was satisfied with respect to Don Blankenship. So that's the lawsuit. It was filed about 2 months ago in West Virginia, and we're fighting the various multimedia outlets. And you know, this case interested me because, first of all, Don was defamed, and it was wrong, and these people need to hear about it. But it also interested me because we're living in a time where the media is completely out of control. It's out of control. I believe in free speech. They have abused, and they continually abuse this right of free speech to the point where they knowingly and continuously lie. As I said, I'm a supporter of Donald Trump's. What this media has done to Donald Trump since he became a president is really a travesty. The lies, the falsehoods, everything on a daily basis. They know they're lying. They keep doing it. They think they're above the law. They think they can get away with it. And Don Blankenship said, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm going to take a stand. And I support Don in that regard. That's why I was very interested to get involved in this lawsuit for Don. There are other issues that Don was subject to that I also support him on. I think he was really the victim of a United States prosecution against him that was fueled by the Obama administration that could not stand Donald Blankenship, because Don Blankenship was the face of the coal industry in many respects, and he was very much against the unions down there, and the Obama administration really did whatever it could to destroy him. So from another standpoint, I'm not a fan of watching these prosecutions that run amok with the infinite resources of the U.S. government that can be used to really try and destroy somebody. The prosecutors that were set off to destroy Don Blankenship, they ended up getting taken to task after the case, basically in one way, shape, or form, by the independent reviewer, government reviewer, saying that they essentially committed legal malpractice. They didn't provide, for example, evidence to Don that they were duty bound to provide, and on and on and on. Right. So for these various reasons, I'm very interested in what Don went through, and I'm here to support him, and we feel good about the lawsuit. And it's time that somebody with Don's resources and Don's commitment is taking on these outfits.
So before getting back to the media lawsuit here, what ramifications were there against the prosecutors that filed this lawsuit against Don?
Well, they got basically a slap on the wrist. I mean, it's not a slap on the wrist if you're a prosecutor, and the independent counsel's office, I believe, is who did it. They investigated the prosecution after the whole thing was over, and they issued a report. And among other things, they said that these guys, these prosecutors who set off with the entire government behind them and all those infinite resources to go after Don Blankenship, they failed, among other things, to disclose all this exculpating evidence they had on Don. They're duty bound. They're bound by law to disclose that. So the independent counsel's office came down against them, said that, but as far as what happened to them and what repercussions these two prosecutors in particular suffered, I'm not sure. I don't think they're prosecutors anymore, so hopefully this had something to do with that.
Is there a case there for you or for Don to file?
Well, Don is working on having even the misdemeanor against him, the whole thing overturned, so hopefully he'll be successful in that regard. I'm not working on that.
Okay.
But that gets into this whole other thing, and we've seen this all now play out in front of us with the special prosecutor and with what President Trump has had to go through, and what people who were working with the president have suffered. For example, this fellow Manafort and Flynn and some of these others. The government prosecutors, they basically have, or believe they have, carte blanche to do whatever they want if they're going after somebody. And it's almost impossible to fight these people, especially when they're threatening to throw you in prison for life if you don't basically just plead to something, and you don't have the financial resource to fight it. I really do believe that there's got to be a completely new system of checks and balances on a government that's going out of control.
What do you expect, and what can happen with this multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against so many different media outlets?
I expect that we're going to be victorious. That's what I expect. As far as what the numbers are, I don't want to predict what the numbers are going to be when this.
Victorious
when this
means
gets
what?
resolved.
They're not going to pay you $12 billion.
We'll have to see what happens. It's at the beginning of the lawsuit now, but they have to be taught a lesson, and don't defame Don Blankenship. Don't do it.
But you're talking. Okay, so my question is, you're focused on a systemic problem in the media. I think there was a report that just came out today that more people are concerned about fake media than they are terrorism and the environment. Okay, that's the latest poll that just came out on that. So people are obviously aware that there's a systemic problem with the media and how we learn our news today. And as so many of us go into our echo chambers and cocoons, fewer of us are watching cable news. The biggest news channel is Fox News, and they're only at the highest peak is getting 3 million views. There's 325 million people in this country. So where people are learning about their news, whether it's on social media or otherwise, this is a systemic issue. What does this lawsuit, or like I said, what do you hope to happen? What can happen? What can happen with this lawsuit internally for the media?
What I would like to see is, besides winning the lawsuit and getting Don serious damages paid to him. There's been talk, and the talk is rising, and it's happening more and more about changing the legal standards involved in what the repercussions are if the media defames a public figure. You know, Donald Trump's been talking about it now for a couple of years, saying he thinks the standards should be relaxed, and it should be easier to sue the media if they defame somebody. There's a case that came out from the U.S. Supreme Court a couple months ago. We cited in our complaint that we filed on behalf of Mr. Blankenship. And in a concurring opinion or a dissent, I don't remember exactly what, Justice Clarence Thomas came out with a several-page explanation as to why the present standards protecting the media from having defamation from their intentional ongoing defamation, why those standards have to be relaxed so that it's easier to take these media folks to task so that they stop destroying public figures and thinking they can get away with it willy-nilly. Clarence Thomas goes through the history of the First Amendment in his opinion. He talks about how back in the day, public figures such as Don Blankenship actually had more protections than common citizens by the First Amendment. So Justice Thomas says, basically, I'm paraphrasing, of course, that this New York Times versus Sullivan, that's a very famous case from the 1960s, which started the long march to giving the media this unbelievable protections, how New York Times versus Sullivan, it's time for that standard to be changed. So one of the things I hope we start seeing from this lawsuit is the ability to start chipping away at the ridiculous protections that the mass media in our country has. Because unfortunately, the media has gone way too far. They become way too arrogant. They think they can do anything. They think they can say anything. They do anything. They do say anything about anybody. True or false. They have tremendous power over people's minds and the way we think. It's time that they start realizing they can't do that. So one of the things I hope, and this goes to your question, is that this case can start helping us chip away at this standard. I know Don is going to fight this case as long as it has to be fought. And I support him for that.
Not only are you an advocate for people like Don and free speech and going against the media who have obviously, in your words, lied, you're also going after some of our institutions. And in California, we're talking about the school districts. And I want to get into that right after the break. We're here with Eric Early, Dave Sussman. We'll be right back. And Dave Sussman back with you, and I'm delighted to be still with Eric Early, and we're covering a lot of different bases here, whether it's free speech and whether it's the state of California and what's going on there as well. Eric is really involved in a lot of different issues, and his law firm is forefront on some of these issues as well. Eric, where can folks find more information about you and your law firm, by the way?
www.earlysullivan.com.
Early Sullivan.
EARLYSULLIV as in Victor, AN.com. We're very blessed here. We all, or the five of us who started this firm, broke away from a big, fancier firm about 9 years ago. And we're now up to approximately 30 lawyers. I'm the managing partner. We handle cases all over the state of California, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Florida. We're starting to move into New York. We represent all the largest title insurers in the nation. We represent individuals who are being trying to be kicked out of their homes by fraudsters. We do also real estate litigation, entertainment litigation, business-to-business battles in First Amendment and other constitutional type of battles. So it's a great thing. We have great lawyers here, and we're blessed, and this is actually what gave me the platform to be able to run for Attorney General in this great state of California, the once and future great state of California, because we're coming back.
Make California great again, huh? So the one of the big cases that you're currently involved with right now, which is all over the place, if you can look it up in the media, is your case against the Santa Barbara School District.
Yeah.
And without getting into, me trying to explain it, I'd love for your explanation of exactly what's going on right now. I think a lot of people are deeply concerned about this indoctrination that we're seeing from so many different areas, whether it's kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, or what we're hearing about the leftist march through our academia and our colleges and such. Talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Santa Barbara School District and why you filed a lawsuit there.
Yeah, just generally, before I get into the specifics of the lawsuit, what's going on in our school districts, our public school districts, we hear about it generally. A lot of us hear about it. Not everybody hears about it. But there is this sort of creeping social justice warrior takeover of our districts. And you look at the the Bibles that these people follow. I'm not talking literally about the Bible. I'm talking about the Saul Alinsky's of the world and these other very radical type people. They have all these quotes about how if you control the education of the kids and take over the education, you gain control of everything. And they are following that script to a T. And so what's going on in Santa Barbara is I was contacted in about October of last year by a concerned citizen up there who knew I'd run for Attorney General, and he said, "Listen, Eric, you got to see what's going on up here. We need to stop this." And he sent me some written materials that were being passed out to teachers by this group that was teaching teachers how to teach students, this group called Just Community Central Coast. And when you look at these materials, they're shocking. And I'll go into some of the materials more. And so what we're doing is we represent a group of people called Fair Education Santa Barbara. Concerned citizens in Santa Barbara, California. Started off with this one fellow, then it moved to about 5 folks. Now we're up to over 200 citizens up there. And we're suing the Santa Barbara Unified School District and this outfit called Just Community Central Coast. And we're suing them for several reasons, but primarily we're suing them for racial and religious discrimination. When you read their materials and when you hear from folks who've attended their workshops, they're overtly and extremely anti-white, overtly and extremely anti-Christian, anti-white male. It's in their materials. It's all over their materials. So these folks were hired by the school district to do what's called unconscious bias training, to help people not to be biased. And instead what they're doing is they're teaching people how to discriminate. They're teaching people how to be biased. They're creating divisions in the community and among the kids. It has to be stopped. This group is outrageous. And then as you dig into this, and as we've dug into this, we have found that the majority of the Santa Barbara Unified School District's board are far left type individuals. This is the board that makes the decisions who to hire for these purposes. The superintendent up there, same thing, far left. And so we're suing them. And it's really, the lawsuit is for the most part still in its preliminary stages. But one of the great things about our lawsuit is that it has shined a really bright light for the entire Santa Barbara community as to what's going on in their kids' classrooms and what this board is doing and this indoctrination that's going on. It's all over the press in Santa Barbara, which has been fabulous. It's made national news, and we're going to continue with it. One of the great ironies of our lawsuit is that we're suing based on statutes and laws that were set up to protect African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian American minorities from being discriminated against. We're basing our case on the same laws now to protect white people. And I want to just be really clear about this because, unfortunately, given the narrative that the left-wing media, especially mainstream media, is pushing, and these and the Democratic Party's pushing, if you support white people, well, you're a white supremacist, right?
Well, this is some of the feedback that you're getting in Santa Barbara. Yeah. You're getting this,
and it's really, we know who we are. We know we're not white supremacists. We believe, Fair Education Santa Barbara was set up to protect students of every race, creed, color, sexual orientation, religion. This is the way the left wing, and I'm sure many of your viewers are very well aware of this. They try and shut you down. You're a racist. You're a white supremacist. You're, blah, blah, blah. We're none of those things. If anything, the people on the other side are the racists. They're out of control. We will not be shut down. But one of the things that's difficult about bringing a lawsuit like this is individuals. We have so many supporters up there. They don't want to put their names on this lawsuit, and they don't want to. They just don't want the other side to know that they're involved. And the reasons are obvious, because we're aware of the tactics the other side uses. How they try and destroy people, destroy people's reputations, destroy them in the community. Sometimes they actually get violent. So we understand that. That's why the lawsuit's being brought and named Fair Education Santa Barbara. But we're going to keep fighting this thing. And as I was interviewed on the Glenn Beck show at one point about this, and Glenn or his partner on the show called this a hydra.
Seven-headed hydra, yeah.
It's a hydra because this kind of stuff is in districts all over the country. We're hearing from people all over the country, and we want to form a beachhead here.
Right. So my question
because it's
for
got to
you
be stopped.
Is this
It's going to be
what
stopped.
is your MO as far as, because the immediate reaction from the media and from many citizens, from the school district and many on the left as well, is that this is creating racial discourse, that your lawsuit alone is creating racial discourse, that what they were doing was equitable across all the board, but what you're doing now is about whiteness and protecting white people. How do you answer that? Like you just said, so many people don't want to put their name on this thing because all of a sudden they have, people are worried about their careers and their social relationships because all of a sudden they're now put in the focus as being a racist themselves. What is your MO to deal with that, and how do you get around that today?
Listen, you just have to be bold enough to start saying what's actually going on and keep doing it. You have to be honest. You have to be honest with the people. You have to be honest with the media. You have to be honest with the courts. And you just have to keep saying it, and notwithstanding the slings and arrows that you get hit with,
right.
And point it out for what it is. And we know, because we talk to the people, just like I spoke to so many people when I was campaigning in California, we know that so many people agree with us. Hundreds and hundreds of people, and probably thousands in Santa Barbara, agree with what we're doing. So they see it, and they're very concerned with what's happening. So we have tons of supporters, and we're just going to keep maintaining this. We can't back down in the face of this evil that we're facing, and I really do believe it is
right.
evil. And what the other side is doing, really, and what they sort of build on and use is they're taking primarily the Hispanic American community up there in Santa Barbara and making them out as if they're all victims. They're like all victims of the bad and evil white man. And it's just so outrageous. And so many Hispanic Americans I've spoken to up there have said, we don't like what they're doing. we're tired of being made to look like we're victims. And I'll just give you another example. I was part of a Hispanic American family for a decade. My last girlfriend was Mexican American. Her dad, also Mexican American, was a Vietnam vet. He was probably the most conservative person I've ever met in my life. I used to go there every Sunday. He'd sit me down in front of Fox. We'd watch it all day long and just talk about things. He couldn't stand Barack Obama. He's very much against illegal immigration to this country, and he's very pro-American. And there are so many Hispanic Americans like that who I support, who support President Trump. But if you are to believe the mainstream media, you would never hear what I just told you.
Right.
You would never hear it. That's another way, getting back to one of your first questions, was how do Republicans again and conservatives again get back in power in California? And it's a matter of getting this message out to our Hispanic American citizens.
Let's get into that because we're going to our last break here,
Yeah.
and then we're getting into our last section. I want to get back to California with you and some other things that are going on right here. We're continuing here with Eric Early. Dave Sussman will be right back after the break. And Dave Sussman back with you here at America's Voice News, and we're continuing here at our last segment with Eric Early, who is involved in so many different pivotal issues across the country. We're talking right now about what just took place in Santa Barbara with his lawsuit against the school district in Santa Barbara. But going back to California here, because we started out talking about California. Again, you ran for Attorney General in the state of California. You got almost 1 million votes. That's incredible, first of all. I mean, that must have been extremely rewarding to you to see that, from the standpoint in a state like California. But the Attorney General today, you were talking about Mexican Americans, okay? Xavier Becerra, okay? He is probably one of the most antagonistic politicians in California against our president and against most people right of center. Yeah. From what I understand, and this is really interesting to me, you're actually part of filing a lawsuit against the Attorney General of the state of California.
Yeah.
Talk about this.
All right, let me just finish where I left off and last thing, then I'll get into this.
Please.
Hispanic Americans, for the most part, are God-fearing, love their families, some of the hardest working people you'll ever meet. Natural Republican constituency. The Democrats are terrified in this state of people like me who say that, who talk about our respect for Hispanic Americans and why the Republican positions and platforms are the home for Hispanic Americans. The Democrats are terrified of people like me saying this, and so they have this narrative, which we've all seen, about how we just want to deport everybody, blah blah blah. It's all completely ridiculous. But I tremendously respect Hispanic Americans, and I believe more and more of them are going to come and support the Republican Party in California, and that's yet another way and reason why we will take back this state. Now, when it comes to Xavier Becerra, one of the people who's a master at selling this false myth that I just spoke about Republicans and Hispanic Americans, Xavier Becerra is a political hack. Xavier Becerra is the Attorney General of the state of California, but he's a political hack because he has been a politician his entire adult life. And he has then taken over this Attorney General's office, and he's been using it completely for political purposes. It's like we might as well have Nancy Pelosi sitting in our Attorney General's office. So what this guy has done is he has filed, I believe we're over 50 now, 50 lawsuits against the Trump administration. The lawsuits are paid for by California's taxpayer money. The state is financially bankrupt. The law enforcement could use tens of millions of dollars to bolster what they're doing. For example, this guy Becerra is spending tens of millions of dollars in lawyers and our time and our taxpayer money to sue the Trump administration. And it's an outrage. When I was campaigning against Becerra, I said that he's obsessed with Donald Trump. I said that he must every waking moment of his day think about Donald Trump. When he wakes up, has his cup of coffee in the morning, he thinks about Trump. When he goes to sleep at night, he thinks about Trump. He's obsessed with it. What he's done is outrageous. What I was saying when I was campaigning is, as a plaintiff, the plaintiff in these lawsuits is the state of California. You can file a lawsuit, but you can also dismiss a lawsuit. And if I had been elected, I would have gone through every single one of those lawsuits and determined which ones to dismiss immediately. So anyhow, yes, I am presently a plaintiff in a lawsuit against Xavier Becerra. We filed this towards the end of the campaign. We discovered that Xavier Becerra had been what's called an inactive member of California State Bar for 26 straight years when he was off, in Washington, D.C. and such. A couple great people came to me and told me they would represent me as my lawyer in this lawsuit. I'm represented by Steve Cooley, a great man. He's a former district attorney of Los Angeles County. He ran against Kamala Harris for the Attorney General position. I don't know how many years ago, 10 years or so ago, the first time she ran. He beat her. But on election night, he had won. Then they went out and counted the votes, counted the provisional ballots, counted by Democratic Union members, and a week or so later, Steve Cooley somehow lost the vote. If Steve had been elected, by the way, this entire state would have been just a different and far better place these days. But Steve is representing me in my case against Becerra, as is another great lawyer named Rex Paris. And they came to me and said, let's file this lawsuit. We looked at it. What we're suing Mr. Becerra for, it's a very meritorious and serious lawsuit, is that as an inactive lawyer, you are not allowed to practice law. In fact, if you're an inactive lawyer and you represent somebody practicing law, it's a misdemeanor in the state of California. There's a statute in California that says, right on the books in California, it says to run for Attorney General and to be Attorney General, you have to be admitted to practice, remember those words, for at least 5 straight years before you run for Attorney General. Mr. Becerra was admitted, but he couldn't practice because he was inactive member of the bar, not an active member of the bar. So just inactive members can't practice. It's
so how was he admitted?
He passed the bar. Back in the day, he went to law school 20 some odd years ago. He passed the bar. He paid his dues and he was admitted to practice. And at some point for a year or two, way back in the day, he was an active member of the bar. He could have practiced.
Okay.
But when he decided to go off to a career of politics, he changed his status from active to inactive. When you're inactive, you don't have to take the ongoing educational requirements that practicing and active lawyers have to take. And as I said, you cannot practice law. The statute says you have to be admitted to practice for at least 5 consecutive years before you run for Attorney General. He was admitted, but not to practice. Got it? Mm-hmm. That's a lawsuit. That statute has never been interpreted by anything other than a trial court in our state. Trial court interpretations are non-binding. They're not precedent. They can't be used as precedent. This statute has to be interpreted by a court of appeal and higher. And that's where we are right now. This is a matter of first impression in California. We had originally brought that lawsuit to try and keep him off the ballot. And we had to bring him on an emergency basis, the lawsuits, because we had learned about it shortly before the election. The courts refused to go with us. The Superior Court in Sacramento denied our emergency request.
Based on?
Based on that lower court, that judge's interpretation of the statute and interpretation of cases from other states. We very much disagree with his interpretation. Now, I assume a lot of your viewers are also thinking, because I think this, our courts are quite politicized these days, to say the least. And, if you're a judge and you want to be, lifted up and, and elevated in your career, the last thing you want to do is come down against the sitting Attorney General and his entire party, by the way, in the state of California. Anyhow, Superior Court judge comes down against us. We thought he was wrong. We sought emergency relief from the Court of Appeal. They held on to the matter for about a week, which, when you're seeking emergency relief from the Court of Appeal, is saying something, because usually those things, if they're going to be denied, are denied within about 24 hours. We then sought emergency relief from the California Supreme Court. Usually California Supreme Court just doesn't pay attention to most of these matters. California Supreme Court asked us for both sides, for emergency briefing, and then it denied our request. So the election happened. Xavier Becerra got elected Attorney General, but now we're allowed to do what's called a regularly noticed appeal, and this is now making its way through the Court of Appeals in the state of California. We're hoping to get some good judges on our side on this panel, and it's in Sacramento, and our opening brief on appeal was filed about 3 weeks ago. Becerra's is due shortly. There will be an oral argument at some point, probably during the year 2019, and we'll see what happens. But we have a very strong argument.
Is there a precedent like this? Have you seen this in any other states?
Yes, we cite precedents in other states. The statutes in the other states on which those particular cases rely are worded somewhat differently, but the key words and the key sort of intent behind the words is the same. And for example, there's one case in Connecticut we cited that said, listen, this statute's here for a reason, because we want the chief legal officer of a state, because that's what the Attorney General is, the chief legal officer, chief law enforcement officer of the state, to actually know what it's like to practice law, all right? We don't want just some carpetbagger in there who happens to have a law degree to be the chief law enforcement officer of the state, and that's why we have this statute. So we're seeking the same type of interpretation for the statute out here. Now, if you go with Mr. Becerra's interpretation, you can have basically anybody end up as your Attorney General in a state, and this is not a governor position. It is attorneys are practicing professionals. Governors can be, whatever, actors and famous people, and you don't have to be a lawyer and blah blah blah. But when you're Attorney General, it's a different kind of position.
My question for you is this then. Some people will take a look at this and they say, because you lost against Xavier Becerra, this is politicized. And are you the right person to bring this? I mean, is that something that is worthy of consideration?
Well, listen, obviously, this case has a lot of political issues addressed to it. I was running against the man. He is a lifelong politician. He is the sitting Attorney General. But at the end of the day, it comes down to interpreting a statute, using the facts and law to interpret this statute. We submit that if it's done right, Mr. Becerra should be found not legally eligible to be the Attorney General
what would happen?
Of the state of California. Well, when we originally brought the lawsuit, we were hoping to keep him off the ballot. Now that he's the sitting Attorney General, a couple things could happen. It'd be sort of uncharted territory, but one thing that could happen and should happen is he should be told, listen, sir, you are not legally eligible pursuant to your own state's laws to be sitting in the seat that you're sitting in. You have to vacate the Attorney General's office. Then how would that seat be filled? There's different possibilities. I think there should be a special election for the voters to vote on who should fill that seat. Somebody else might argue it's the governor gets to fill that seat. There's probably other ways as well. So that's where we stand with this.
speaking of California and politicians, and I know that this is not an attorney general's within his overview, but it's certainly Secretary of State. We're seeing a lot of issues and reports today about voter harvesting and cheating, and this new technology that's now coming out, enabling illegal aliens or illegal immigrants to be able to vote as well. In fact, there's a push in California to allow illegal immigrants to.
Yeah, it's nuts.
What's your perspective on all this?
Well, I could go on and on about it. First of all, I'm very against the sanctuary state legislation we have in this state. When I was campaigning, I called the sanctuary state law the Illegal Immigrant Felon Protection Act, because the sanctuary state laws in the state of California are being used exclusively to protect folks who not only came here illegally, but that have committed felonies since they got here. The last thing any country or any state should be doing is protecting people like that. Those people who came here illegally and committed felonies should be thrown out of the country. We're not talking about the moms and pops who came here illegally with their families, who've been abiding by the law, working hard to become part of the American fabric. Nobody in California in power, or even who was running for office, is talking about deporting those people. But those people who've committed felons since they got here should be booted out of here. And that's the only thing those sanctuary laws are being used to protect. Those sanctuary laws should be thrown out. Again, it's the Illegal Immigrant Felon Protection Act. We should never have it, and no state should have a law like that. And as far as but I also support the president. We need to secure the borders. Okay. I'm a huge supporter of legal immigration. My parents were both legal immigrants to the United States of America. All right? Republicans support legal immigration, notwithstanding what the mainstream media and Democrats try and say, right? We hate all immigrants. No. If I hate all immigrants, I guess I hate my parents. We support legal immigration. We cannot support this endless flood of illegal immigration that's been coming across our southern border. It's got to be stopped, and I support a wall. Getting back to this voting, what's going on out here is just it's just ridiculous. It's another example of the overreaching and the arrogance of the Democratic power structure in the state. It's another reason why I believe the worm is going to turn, because people throughout our state are sick of it. You got these laws out here. The ballot harvesting, which I'll get into if you want to, which is just an outrage. You have a law now that everybody in the state of California, whether you're legal or illegal, can get a driver's license. Then the Democrats pass a law that says everybody who registers at DMV automatically gets registered to vote. Now they say that they're not doing that for illegal immigrants should automatically be registered to vote. But from what we understand and from what we hear and from the apparent lack of oversight by this far left Secretary of State, it's bleeding through such that illegal immigrants who get their driver's license are then getting the ability to vote. So there's all of these laws in our state that are just allowing for fraud and abuse in the election system. And that would get me on another subject I can go on and on about, because, again, the Democrats and the mainstream media in this country love to make it sound like Republicans want to suppress the vote and keep citizens from voting, and that's complete garbage. And instead, what we're seeing is a weaponized, almost, Democratic Party that's doing whatever they can to create fraudulent and support fraudulent voting. Republicans want every American citizen of age who's not a felon to be able to vote. Democrats apparently want everybody, whether you're an American citizen or not, whether you're a felon or not, to be able to vote. That's what's going on, and that's what Republicans are so much against. If you want me to get into ballot harvesting, I'll talk
I wish
about
we could,
that.
because there's so much more I want to
Another
get into
outrage,
with
by
you.
the way.
Absolutely, and it's definitely something we've talked about on our show as well. But listen, from somebody sitting here in the heart of the beast, Right.
Belly of the beast.
Belly of the beast. And you're fighting, I mean, you talk about a hydra, you're fighting like a hydra as well, whether it's the school districts, whether it's, we're talking about Don Blankenship's situation and going against the media, obviously Sacramento and Xavier Becerra. This is fascinating to me, and I wish we can go on and on and on because I'm sure, but it's nice to know that there is somebody that is taking it.
Not just me.
Real quick question for you, last question for you as we finish up here. What has been the reaction from your colleagues?
I'm actually a nice guy.
What's been the reaction from your colleagues here in Beverly Hills and Century City, the law centers of the West Coast, to these cases that you're taking on here?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to say that there are still Republicans and conservatives, even here in Los Angeles, and I get tremendous support from those folks. But we are in, as I say, the belly of the beast here. And, you know, I just say bring it on. And I get in lots of disputes with a lot of people. I've been doing that for a long time now. You know, even in my own law firm, I've got some incredibly intelligent lawyers that are partners of mine. But when it comes to politics, it's like somebody sucked the brain out of their heads, and I've been arguing with them for years.
They're
about
not going to be watching this.
I mean, I'll give your viewers they can watch it if they want. It's no secret. I've got one partner here, very intelligent guy. This guy, in the last election cycle, probably is now, I haven't spoken to him about, was supporting Bernie Sanders. So one day I walk in his office, I close the door, I say, hey, I won't mention his name, hey, so-and-so. Listen, if your guy wins, let me know where you want me to send 80% of your paycheck to, okay? Because we'll have to find some shelter or some something, some government-controlled something for me to send your money to. So let me know where 80% could be sent to. And he looked at me like I was nuts, but that's exactly what would happen if some of these unrepentant socialists, you know, get in power. So. Listen, I like a good debate. I like to fight for what I believe in. I think you can hear that and see that. I believe America is the greatest country that God ever created, and I want to do whatever I can and work with the people I know to make sure that we stay that way. Because without America, this will be one dangerous and bad world.
Eric Early, thank you so much for joining us again. Folks can find you where? Early Sullivan?
EarlySullivan.com. I had, when I was running, I had a campaign website, which is ericearly.com. So there's stuff on me there too, although I'm not involved in a campaign at the moment.
Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks
and best
for
of
having
luck
me, Dave.
with your fights.
Thank you.
And we'll be back again real soon. Dave Sussman here, America's Voice News. Find us at Ricochet and all of your favorite podcast applications, America's Voice News, and of course, YouTube. And we'll be back again soon. Cheers.